So in this video, we're actually going to take a little bit of a step back, right? We've talked about tiling these textures and blending them, and we've talked about building shaders with them. And so I'm going to make the assumption that you understand that you can build a lot of complexity off of this, and we're going to look at sort of different methods of blending these things. Now, I've got a different situation here where I've got two different textures blending together. In this case, I have grass and dirt blending together, and it's pretty straightforward. And this is a totally valid method of blending some various different shaders together, or different textures. But one thing we might want to do is thinking about creating a blend that shows like a path of traveling through. Now, we can go ahead and let's get rid of this for now, and we'll go back to our 50% blend. And let's bring a ramp in. And ramp has a standard setup here. And I'm just going to drop the ramp onto the blend colors. Now, you can see that we have a full ramp of blending here, which is exactly what we would expect. And if we did something like bring these close together, we can get this type of blending. Right now, it's not very natural, right? It's pretty straightforward, and we can add noise to the ramp here, right, and increase our noise frequency. But we are this doesn't really give us the same level of interesting control that we had with the noise texture, right? It's kind of difficult to deal with. So how can we sort of get the controls that we're used to with the noise texture with some of the potentials that we have with the ramp of being able to place blends specifically where we want them? For example, if we wanted to have a path traveling through the center of this, I guess I should do it this way. A well-worn dirt path traveling through the center. What if we wanted to have this, but have a nice organic edge along here? Well, we can go about it this way. Let's reset our ramp, and let's look back at our noise texture. So if we just look at the noise texture by itself, and I'll put it onto the color here so we can see it in the viewport. If we just look at our noise texture in itself, you'll notice that we have a couple different values. We have threshold, which allows us to kind of blow it out. Amplitude, which is almost like a contrast, right? Ratio, which increases how sharp some of our edges get. And things like frequency ratio. All these things that add additional levels of detail to our noise texture, which is really nice. Well, let's get this remap here because that makes sense to me. Color. And our remap here is going to be straightforward. Let's just zero this out. Notice we're getting some overshoot values here, so it just needs to come down in our color gain. Our color offset needs to be matched in a little bit here. So we'll just get rid of some of that contrast. There we go. All right, so that matches up. And those are just negative values being generated by the noise. So let's go ahead and see what we can do with this ramp and the noise. One thing you obviously, using the blend node here, we've noticed that we can do some interesting things with how colors come together by using this one slider and feeding a texture to it. So essentially, we're getting different values at every aspect of our geometry. So we're going to extend that with the noise here, and instead of putting in adjusting our threshold and amplitude using just big numbers that do whatever it's going to happen, I'm going to take our ramp and I'm going to drop it into threshold, and I'm going to drop our ramp into amplitude. And you'll notice what we get here is this going from 50% gray, because our amplitude flattens it out, to a full white. But we get a transition in the high frequency detail of our noise texture here. Well, one of the things we have kind of as a bummer is that we can only go to this 50% gray, which is where this remap comes back in. If 50% here is our gray value, well, we can just bring our black position up to 0.5. And all of a sudden we're remapping into a full black. And it might take, that's right, we did a little bit of offset, so it takes a little bit of refiguring, but our remap ramp here allows us to make sure that the values that we want are falling in the zone we want it, right? So even though our noise is generating this gray value, we're able to remap that to our black and white values, right? So what we've done is we've used our ramp to drive how noisy our texture is. And this can be really handy because we can start, I'm going to edit this ramp. I can bring it up from the bottom, and you can see how wonderfully that sort of transitions, right? We can use this for a variety of effects, things burning away or whatnot. But in this case, we can bring this in closer so we get that hard edge, and we can actually rebuild that sort of idea that we had of, I guess it was the other way around, of getting a path through the center. And now our path has a really nice, organic edge that allows us to sort of imagine that maybe the grass was beaten away by various walking that didn't always come down the straight line. So we can go ahead and we can take this blend colors and we'll put it right back here. So here we can start seeing some of the values of this. I can take my ramp, I can adjust it. Now don't forget that we also have other options here. Instead of interpolating it linear, we can use bump or smooth, which gives us a little bit of a different edge there, right? And so our edge is organic, and we can come in and we can come back to our noise, and we can increase our ratio, our frequency ratio, our frequency, and get sort of that more hard edge look that we were going for. And again, this is easier to visualize if we didn't have these connected. And I'll just disconnect them real quick so you can see. We'll just go back to our red and blue colors. So there's our blend that's happening, right? And you can notice how beautifully organic that is, right? And again, we have full control over where that goes. How wide it is, how tight one edge is, and how we can bring it up to another edge. We can expand the black area here. So all of these different things we can change. And when we do feed our textures into it, it just gets that much better, right? And and again, not to forget the fact that we have different types of ramps to deal with, right? Not just the V ramp, which is across this direction going up and down, but the U ramp, so we can change the direction. We also have a diagonal ramp if you need it. The radial ramp, which in this case doesn't seem to make much sense, but the circular ramp makes it seem like we could have a zone where maybe horses run in a circle with a post in the center here. And we can even get this in here, and notice what happens when we lift up this white value. If we drop this white value, we get sort of a really nice organic chewing in, that gives us a little bit more control over how that looks, right? So we have a lot of different control options once we start feeding things into this noise texture. And again, we're getting a lot of this, this high frequency detail, not for free, but we have a lot of control over it without baking anything in. For example, there's no reason why we have to be feeding a ramp into this, right? What if I had, I'll delete that, and we can come over to my textures and we can see that I've got a path, right? And I can feed that if we remember that the path gets, that the texture gets fed into threshold and amplitude. So we'll do threshold and amplitude. Right? And we can see that this makes our path, which is pretty straightforward. And again, just thinking of the other two videos, having the various tiling options created for the dirts and the textures would really make this a lot of different, would make this very useful for large open spaces that need to have, you can use a variety of resolutions of textures to get what you want. For example, this walking path is a 2K texture. This grass is a 1K. This dirt is below 1K. So so we can use what we need. And in this case, this sharp edge texture isn't the most useful thing. We do have options for filtering it here, which I think we can do something with that. Box filtering. Filter offset. Should be able to export. Oh, we're looking at the wrong thing. We're looking at this dirt texture. Well, I guess it's not really filtering this the proper way. I was afraid of that, but I just kind of thought of that as I was working here. But obviously, I kind of prepared for this because I had already pre-blurred my texture, right? So I had this texture pre-blurred from Photoshop. And what I can do here is is similar to what this setup is. The first thing I'm going to do is set this up to have a color remap. And I'm going to take this remap and I'm going to feed it into my threshold and amplitude. Now, why do I do that? I do that because I may want to control how detailed my path is, or how much it's blurred. You'll notice, because you can see that it's blurred here, but I can really, because it's got that range of values in there, let's do a test texture here. Because it's got this range of values in here, it means that I can grab any of these values and make them black just by sliding this up. And you can see that kind of coming back into play here. In this same way I can do it with the white, is I can kind of decide what parts are black and which parts are white, and which parts get the gray values. So I may want to have as much of that gray as possible. And that's then what I'm feeding to my noise, which has its own variety of aspects in here, where we can take our frequencies and we can get in close. We can see those things. Now we might have to adjust this ramp here a little bit, make sure that we get the blending that we want to get out of that. And here we can get a different frequency and depth and frequency ratio, and start to try to build that organic pathway once again. Now sometimes, like I said, it's a little bit hard to see, so we can eliminate these and get sort of a view of how it's building out and the different levels of what we're feeding it. And you can see sort of how quickly we can build out a nice organic edge. There we are. Let's try in here. A higher depth. And one of the other things to not forget is that we can also, let me bring this down a little bit here. A bit more of an edge. We can also change it up if we're not happy with how this edge is. Maybe we're dealing with something a little bit of a lower frequency and a lower different depth here. And if we want to make sure that we're sculpting exactly what we want, we can just adjust our time value until we're happy with how it looks. Right. Our time value will be kind of shifting that through there as much as we want. So it's an easy way to, like I said, build up a set of textures to cover a large expanse of space, and then to bring in another texture of any resolution that you need to cover how those things transition together. So this methodology is just it's just a pretty straightforward way to be able to cover large spaces. But once again, it doesn't really matter. You could be painting a robot or some metal texture, and you just need to highlight some edges and then use the noise texture with that low resolution texture to create a nice organic edge from something that you just painted up quickly. So anyways, that wraps it up for just sort of talking about blending textures and using this blend colors node combined with some noise and remaps. So anyways, keep that in mind as you're trying to build out larger spaces. Thanks.
Shut up and sit down.